Well, first of all, I would like to thank Transmathematica, especially James and the anonymous reviewers. First, for their help in improving my paper, and second, for the opportunity to speak here and converse with you about aggregation dynamics. I also want to thank friends for comments on earlier versions of the article. We hope to finish it, James and me, in the coming week. Here is a concise table of contents. I will start with an introduction. I will discuss my motivation for developing a theory which I call aggregation dynamics. Let's see, I need to adjust my screen a little bit. Okay. I will put forward what I call the Martian perspective in order to stretch our perspective on the things we see around us and that we deal with daily. And I hope to develop in that way an intuition for aggregations and for aggregation dynamics. Next, I will introduce one of the main claims of aggregation dynamics. I call it the innovation illusion. It says that we may feel innovative and creative, but I think we're not. I think we repeat ourselves. So the innovation power of us is an illusion. I will try to give some plausibility to this innovation illusion by studying a number of cases. Then I'll shortly discuss two, I think, well-known clusters of facts about our mental capabilities. I call these the specification paradoxes. And together with the innovation illusion, assuming it makes some sense, we get to the control illusion. We not only repeat ourselves, but we're also not in control. We just react to the things around us. Yeah, how to deal with these two illusions? How can we explain them maybe? Here aggregation dynamics comes in. It is, I will get to this notion further on. And I will finish with a few words on conjectures and on this aggregation dynamical venture. That is a lot to follow, I hope. First, about my motivation. I already look for with quite some amazement at the unstoppable drive with which people tackle problems. Second, I also wonder about the observation that often solutions lead to new problems. And I cannot get rid of the feeling that people are repeating themselves when solving things. Fourth, what is apparent, as far as I can see, is a lack of reflection on this. You can find a lot of literature on problem solving in the engineering literature, but it's hard to find, at least I did not find it in a simple way, a definition for the word problem or solution. In that way, it is a bit similar to accusations, as Jan just discussed. Problems and solutions are a key element in aggregation dynamics. Oh, sorry, I forgot to click a few times. So here's the full sheet. For observations, and I note that problems and solutions are key elements for me to study. When I was puzzled with these observations, my first attempts to understand a little bit of the situation failed. And after some time, I understood that I took people's activities way too seriously. I thought they were working with real things. This changed when I started to realize that problems and solutions are fabrications. They are concocted in our mind. And the relation to reality is quite a story. Helping in this change was what I call the Martian View. So what's the Martian's perspective? What would a biologist from Mars make of the structures and events here on Earth? Let's say this Martian is a biologist. Biologists make typically cuts of the things around them and then put them under a microscope and theorize about what they see. They start to identify structures and parts, give them a name, for instance, the membrane in this cell. Now, what would a Martian think of this situation? Would a Martian partition the things and in time and space the way we do? You see two players, they are heading, or it's a header, it's called in the journals. You see a third player in the background, audience. Probably you hear already the noises they make. Well, what would the Martian consider relevant? What would the Martian leave out or give a name? Suppose the Martian would come up with this. Apparently, the Martian had plenty of time to make a cross-section in a situation that for us just takes a blink of the eye. And it seems that the Martian took the heads together in similar structures. Somehow there's a part fell out. There's a strip in the middle that is white. It seems that what was there to be seen was left unnoticed. The situation was turned 180 degrees, and there's a blue circle. And I'm sorry, I can't tell you what it is. We have to ask the Martian. Suppose the Martian says something incomprehensible about the blue circle. Well, who cares? The Martian view is absurd anyway, isn't it? Well, not so sure. Now ask two people about an everyday situation. You will get two different answers. Moreover, the answers are fragmentary. According to you, may contain irrelevant elements, may make odd assumptions, may assign roles to entities you've never heard of or dreamed possible. Those people may also assign roles to clusters of concepts you consider unrelated. Nevertheless, these situations are real and complete for those interviewed. Well, maybe we're just as Martian, but we don't want to admit it. Now the aggregations come in. With aggregations, I aim at the imagined beings that humans think they deal with in the first place. Aggregations can be conceptual, like the trans reels, can be constellations of various things, like climate change, can be unwieldy, well, to some, like the EU, can be Martian, maybe after all, like half the front wheel of my red bike, plus Vladimir Putin's blue suit he wore yesterday, and a kilo of potatoes. It's a completely valid aggregation. Aggregations can also be relatively concrete and close to what we know. So my bike, or my cat, or my mother. So aggregations may correlate very well with material subsets, also known as organisms, systems, products, organizations. So I call these aggregations too. Oh, it's aggregates here. Well, it's the same. There are many ways to define what aggregation dynamics is. I think it's clear that all the things that I just mentioned are dynamic. But I think that ecology gives a nice starting point. In a well-known handbook, ecology is defined as follows. Ecology is the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms and the interactions that determine distribution and abundance. So I could say aggregation dynamics is ecology minus the set of organisms plus the set of aggregations. It's about the interactions and the abundance of these aggregations. I think aggregation dynamics is a total system. It's clearly a superset of organisms. It aims at the description of all interacting constellations of matter. Now you can maybe ask, what's the difference with physics? Okay, that's something to discuss maybe. Okay, now this was a short introduction about aggregation dynamics. Now forget the aggregations for a while. We will dive into the case studies, but try to be Martian. Before we start with the case studies, first look into the innovation illusion again. It is the first main claim of aggregation dynamics. It says that we repeat ourselves. We think we are creative and innovative, but we're not. I think that humans think in a limited set of problem types. We frame the situations we don't like in a set of problem types. The problems are not dependent on the domain. For each problem, we also have a fixed and limited set of solutions. Okay, that's a bit exaggerating, of course. I call this set of solutions the repertoire. And I think that problems and the repertoire are scale-free. What I mean is that independent of the level of aggregation, so the complexity of the situation you're dealing with, we still frame the problems in these types, and we try to solve them with the repertoire. Okay, we'll see examples of this. I phrased the innovation illusion in terms of humans, but I assume that other aggregations well, suffer under the innovation illusion too. Okay, I don't hear you, but I assume that you think, well, this innovation illusion is absurd. What to say about our top medical care, the great European Union? We have not, well, it's not completely true, but not have not have a war on the continent for quite a long time. What about the Mars rover? Well, a high technical achievement. The proof of Fermat's theorem is also quite a feat. Could these be the result of some kind of problem solving LEGO? Okay, well, I think so, and I will argue why and how. How far are we in the time? Well, doing quite well, I think. What do you think, James?
You've had a quarter of an hour, so you've got 3/4 of an hour left.
First, we will look at the Los Angeles smog case. Why this case? Well, there are actually anything you can see in your environment is useful as a case, but here you can find nice pictures for a start. The cities of Los Angeles County in California had been familiar with air pollution for quite some time. It started already the end of the 19th century when industrialization came up. To downplay the issues, the people spoke of nuisances and just fumes. But in July 1943, the fumes took on such forms that thousands panicked and called the police because of painful airways and burning eyes. Some even feared the Japanese had launched a chemical attack. Soon the link was made between smog and human activity, such as industrial processes, road traffic, private waste burning. But with these suggestions, the problem was far from gone, as we all know. What was the situation? Here you have a map of Los Angeles County and the city of Los Angeles. One of my mouse stopped, is this center. There's a lot of industry here in this belt around the coast. Within the county, cities, villages, and rural communities all had their own legislation on air pollution. Those laws differed and smog problems were also perceived differently. For instance, here up north, they never heard of smog. South Bay, though, was complaining about the harbor, and the harbor was complaining about the South Bay. On its turn, Santa Monica didn't want to pay. Well, you can imagine they're all quarreling about this smog and how to solve it. One solution for this kind of situation, I call it discord, is unification. So all these subsets of the county with all their own rules unified these rules in a new structure with local interpretation and embedding. A metaphor for such a legal structure that I take is an umbrella. In 1947, the enactment of Assembly Bill No. 1 allowed a country in the state of California, after plebiscite, a difficult word, to enact air pollution control legislation applicable to all administrative units. Los Angeles County seized that opportunity right away that year. Other solutions for this situation of quarreling and discord are, of course, ignoring the problem or starting a war or finding a solution bilaterally. I don't deal with those solutions here. I look for the problems or the patterns that we see in the further development here. You can imagine that similar internal conflicts arose in the neighboring counties, and they were also solved with their own air pollution control districts. Now, the funny thing is that the problem reappears at a higher level of aggregation. The counties start now quarreling about smog issues. The discord between units internal to the counties turned into discord between counties. Adjacent counties, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino, decided in the mid-1970s to work more closely together in the South Coast Air Quality Management District, a bigger umbrella. Also, at the federal level, similar things happened. In 1955, the states accepted an act that made statements about air pollution, but still in a very general fashion. And in several steps, this was turned into a far more comprehensive law, the Clean Air Act of the 1970s. And this act had international effects too. At that time, the air pollution question became international. And so following up on the Clean Air Act, you can see the IPCC or legislation in the European Union, and also umbrellas worldwide. I won't discuss those. I see two patterns here. So first we had the issue in the county, and the problem was pushed out to the border of the county, and then the laws at a federal level had the effect that also at state level became at a higher level of aggregation, because new terminology developed and new problems arose, and in a way the law was re-implemented with the Act of in the 1970s. So now I can rephrase those two patterns, I think, by stating that the unification or the implementation of an umbrella creates the conditions for its own reapplication. And using mathematical vernacular, you could say that the unification process behaves like an invariant. I think that such an invariant of invariance is a higher order characteristic of a solution. And there are more of those characteristics, I have the feeling, but that is for future work, and I won't discuss my hunches here. Now we look at another case. Is that true? Yes, traffic jams and electricity grids have similarities. In 1969, we'll first look at the traffic jams. Sociologist Hans van den Braak, a Dutchman, inventoried solutions for traffic jams. And 20 years later, the Royal Dutch Touring Club held a survey around its members. and that included voting on a top 10 of solutions on traffic jams. Let's compare these lists. Well, we have no time to look at all the suggestions in detail, but if you browse through them, you will easily find the typical solutions that are discussed when having a drink with friends, or that are discussed in the newspapers, or that politicians talk about: more roads, carpooling, public transport, road tolls, permit systems, you name it. Now, I think that I can push these two lists in the following scheme. I can group the suggestions on 4 themes, I think. And that's raw capacity, for instance, more roads. It's exclusion, for instance, through tolls. It's optimization, for instance, by smart technology. And it's alternative modality. Why don't you take your bike to go to work? This is what I think typically a repertoire. And all these, a lot of these solutions, I think, show characteristics of invariance. And it leads to a problem that we cannot get rid of. And the American writer and thinker Edward Tanner calls this, for this reason, a chronic problem. We fuse with this problem and we cannot get rid of it, in a very interesting book called Why Things Bite Back. Now to the electricity grids. This is a different domain, but as you will see, we will find the same problem type and the same repertoire. What's the situation here? A primary school had received subsidy from the state for a renovation project and to make its building more sustainable. According to the councilman locally, 300 panels would be put on the roof of the school, and he feared that local residents, these guys, would then be disadvantaged. Of course, these are his voters, because the local electricity grid would not absorb all the unused solar power, and as a result, the owners would be disconnected. So plug in the 300 panels, the unused power of the school would lead to an overload on the network, and this would lead to the disconnection of the local residents. And for them, that is a problem because they sell the electrical power they don't use. So when they are disconnected, their business case fails. In the article that I used for this study, also the municipality is asked for its opinion in the situation, and it said that the state would have ordered the grid operator to increase capacity, and also a capacity check would be carried out. Moreover, they had the idea that some kind of scheme could be worked out, because on the generated power would be used by the school on weekdays and by the private people, the neighbors, so to speak, in the weekend. The solutions are similar to the traffic jam case. We have raw capacity, that is expanding the network. We have exclusion, that is the fear of the councilman. We have the optimization, work out a scheme so that you can both use the limited capacity. What is not mentioned here is an alternative modality. A resident or the school might reason, well, I'll just put down a battery pack and then I won't have to deal with you anymore. That too is a well-known solution in this kind of domain. I think that I've encountered the same problem type and the same repertoire in two different domains, also on a different scale. And it's a problem type that I call congestion. Now we'll quickly look at one more case, mainly to introduce some terms. It's interesting to look what happened under the hood after the uniform legislation was imposed in Los Angeles County. I think that is typical what you see here in this kind of situation, or what I think is what you see, what is typical for this problem situation in Los Angeles is some kind of cycle. First, some kind of unwanted growth is detected. And then the first reaction is research, surveys, inventories, new terminology. And based on this, follow the measures, monitoring, laws, systems, norms. And in reaction to this, people and businesses change practices and behavior. Also, new specialisms appear, new government organs and businesses. Alas, the problem is still there, and then we go back to step one. We say the problem is still there, and we again go into research, refine our terminology, etc. You can picture it like this. Initially, people were talking about a nuisance, and it became a severe problem, smog. And it got more names, and it got chemical terminology came in, and it got more detailed, and etc., etc., etc. The term that I want to introduce here is problem propagation. It's funny that the word propagation was also used by Jan. And well, not funny, I don't think this is just an accident. Another thing I wanted to introduce is the problem front. At some point of time, activity is happening and the complexity is growing. Here we have a picture of the situation in 1955. At the problem front would be a nice title here. Now, I'll stop with the cases. I hope that you have a bit of an idea of the repetition that I see in problem solving and in the solutions applied in these cases. And by induction, I of course come to the innovation illusion that the innovation is everywhere, the illusion is everywhere and the repetition is everywhere. Now let's start with a new subject, or part of the reasoning, the specification paradoxes. There are two specification paradoxes in this presentation. Maybe there are more, or you can refine them. The first I call the hammer paradox. And it says that the things we use have no intrinsic meaning. They just correlate to things in our minds. And the example giving the name here is the following. A hammer is for driving nails. but you can also kill someone with it. What is a hammer? I think the hammer paradox is related to, for instance, Plato with his ideas, Kant's interest in das Ding an sich, and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, but there is a lot of things that I have to check further. Now we get to the game paradox. The game paradox says that we have not the slightest idea about the complexity of the world we're in. So to speak, we don't know the players on the board very well. We may overlook players, we don't know the behavior of the players, their interrelationships, nor the state they are in. In other words, we don't really know what's at stake, what are the rules of the game we are in. A small thought experiment will illustrate this. Suppose take in your mind a typical project you're working on. I think that in a typical project people handle in their daily lives, there are at least 100 variables. Would you ever check, if you implement a solution, all combinations of these variables for possible conflicts? Of course you don't, because you have to check an immense number of combinations. Surely you will forget one important source of conflict in such a case. And so the appearance of follow-up problems, as I call them, is unavoidable. Okay, given the specification paradoxes, how can we be so certain about what we do? I think there is much literature on this. I mentioned two sources. For instance, the older book, The Tree of Knowledge, The Biological Roots of Human Understanding, by two researchers from South America. They describe how organisms live in a projected world. These organisms do not really see the world as it is, but only an image that their mind has put together. More recent is the book of Daniel Kahneman, psychologist and Nobel laureate, and his colleagues. You can look at it as a long line of empirical evidence that people are not as rational as they think they are. People describe the world, the authors of these books, describe how people construct appealing stories from the scant information available to them and next go about. In other words, we make up or project a very simplified world. Now, given the innovation illusion, the hammer paradox and the game paradox, how can we be so sure? I assume we're just groping around, and the psychological studies that I just mentioned, give enough basis for this. We just react to the world. We don't have the initiative, though we may react in a systematic way. We're not in control. We only think we are in control. This condition humaine I call the control illusion. Now we get to aggregation dynamics. Aggregation dynamics aims to provide insight in the two illusions. It aims to come up with a model for complexity growth based on the following principles. First, a liberal combination of liberal combination rules for aggregations or clusters of matter that show some behavior. And I think it would make sense to generalize the ideas behind evolutionary theory from Darwin. Key elements are variation and selection, but I would like to extend the reach here and look at it as multidimensional recursive relations. Everything can have some kind of evolutionary relation with something else. Then I see a central role for information or cognitive capabilities and all these related information processing. And I think it would make sense to free ourselves of the frame of DNA as the only driver for organic complexity growth. Okay, the aggregations we discussed at the start when we were looking at the Martian view of our situation. These aggregations are expected to play a central role in these information structures. And finally, I think that thermodynamical argumentation should play a central role. So the organisms and the structures around us are ordenings, and ordenings need energy to survive. And I think that looking at ordenings as stores of energy, well, helps structuring the ideas. Okay, based on these principles, I hope to build a more precise model, maybe even algebraic. I hope to be more precise in the proof of the innovation illusion and the insight in the properties of causal change that lead to the control illusion. The article that will be published next week will provide more details and a reasoning based on the principles just discussed. And I hope that it will make the two illusions reasonably plausible. For my feeling, plausible enough to work further on this subject. So, what's next? Well, given that I think there's a fixed set of problem types with their own repertoire, and that these problem types and repertoires are scale-free, one would expect that the repetition of the application of the repertoire leads to also to patterns in the problem propagations. And probably these are typable too. I found the work on small models, world models, interesting, and that raises with me the question or the curiosity whether problem propagations looked upon as graphs also show a particular kind of clustering. Finally, a bigger point maybe is a combination of thermodynamics of solutions. So what is the energy going in and out in solutions in relation to the Jeffens paradox and the shifting baseline? I will discuss both quickly. The Jevons paradox says that efficient use of a resource is answered by optimization to counter the shortages, and this leads to a fall in its price. And the funny thing is that this in turn drives demand for it. So the demand goes up, which in turn leads to new shortages. The shifting baseline is that we tend to forget where we started when we entered a change process. So in the process, there's a loss of perception of change that occurs when each generation redefines what is general, what is natural, or what is the basis where to start from. I wonder if you look now at the big efforts that are spent in the energy transition and consider the Jevons paradox and the shifting baseline, what will happen? I fear that all the efforts to consume less energy and to generate energy in different ways will in the end boost the use of energy and of raw materials. Okay, well, we'll see. Some final words. Well, what is an aggregation dynamics when we apply it to itself? I think aggregation dynamics is also an umbrella and possibly an invariant. It will shape the situation in which a new theory can grow. For the rest, when people claim they have a solution for something, I always raise an eyebrow. So the claims and arguments in this presentation and the article are as suspect as any human activity, I fear, and certainly not correct in the end. And maybe a small assurance is perhaps that I do not purport to offer a solution for everything. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope it was clear.
Okay, thank you, Bas. If you stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, I will. Let's see how I do this.
That's it. Excellent. Does anyone have any questions?
I can start if you wish. So, Bas, now suppose you are aware of this story and you look at a simple example, that's the automation of the Dutch tax office, which for 20 years turns out to be an unworkable problem. And they have now announced that they may not be able to collect up to 30% of the taxation. So would these people be helped by being aware of what you say? That somehow they are in a cycle of diagnosis and solution which simply doesn't work. Well, would they be helped in any way by thinking in terms of these aggregations and their dynamics?
Well, I just said that I don't offer a solution, but of course, this is a quite understandable question. I think that that it could help indeed to temper people their eagerness to solve something, to slow things down, and in that way make better preparations for an intervention. But in the end, problems will reappear. So I think at a larger time scale, it won't help, but during our lifetime, it may help.
So to reduce the ambitions.
To reduce the ambitions, yes.
Okay.
Would that make sense to you?
Yes, but it's difficult, of course.
Yeah, it is difficult. The big problem is,
Dutch politicians are unable to do this.
yes, and the rest of the people too.
Let me add something. So I'm very keen on total systems. If people have a problem, I prefer that they find a total solution rather than a partial one. If they have a partial solution, then it's guaranteed that problems will arise.
Mm-hmm.
If they have a total solution, it's not guaranteed by the nature of the solution, but you're claiming that the world is so structured that there will be some reality that's not captured by the total system, and that will create a new problem.
Yes.
And I believe that. I think you're absolutely right, that the world is just so damned complicated, you can never solve it all.
No. Sorry.
Any more comments?
But still, I would guess that some kind of practical term might exist.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way in which you could try to manage the reduction of ambitions? I mean, if you are sure that the ambitions themselves create the problems.
Yes.
So,
well,
what kind of ambition is it to reduce your ambitions?
Yeah. If we look at it thermodynamically, you see that nature creates this reduction of ambitions too. So, for instance, you could say that the store of carbon in the earth is a reduction of ambitions. The energy was not used for a long time. And humans started to break it down and use it to their advantage. So somehow you can postpone entropy for some time. I don't know how to get it done with 8 billion people who are all eager to start a family and have a happy life with everything constantly available. What I found interesting was to read in, let's see, what book was it? A recent book that describes how the Indians looked at the French in Canada, or the Native Americans, it's better, when the French arrived and how they behaved. And they despised the French for the way they handled one another. The Native Americans in this part of America liked the way the technology that the French took with them, but they despised their culture so deeply that they also didn't want to use this technology. So they kept to their own traditions for a long time. Eventually, they had to let go, of course, because most of them were murdered. they had no choice in the end. But this is what I think is an intriguing kind of stubbornness to keep to certain traditions, and maybe people can develop such traditions to abstain from ambition. But it's something that we should look into this in more detail. There is, of course, literature about, for instance, by Dali. How's that called? Well, that was in the long version of the paper. He is aiming to have a sustainable economy with zero growth. But I think that these kind of solutions will end in not in democracy, but some kind of ugly society with a strong leader and some kind of faith.
Really. Well, democracy is an ambition too, which we can give up.
Yeah.
That's clear.
But the alternative isn't nice, I think.